The morning sun reflected off the polished glass doors of the Grand Opal Hotel, casting a warm glow across the marble entrance. It was just after 10 o'clock, and the lobby bustled with well-dressed business people checking out and wealthy tourists planning their day. The Grand Opal wasn't just any hotel. It stood as one of the most prestigious addresses in the city, where rooms started at $500 a night and the penthouse suite could cost more than most people's monthly salary. James Bennett pulled his old pickup truck into the hotel's circular driveway. Parking behind a sleek black limousine, he glanced at himself in the rearview mirror and ran a hand through his graying hair, slightly messy from the baseball cap he'd been wearing on the drive over. The cap, faded blue with his favorite fishing company's logo, had been with him for nearly 15 years. Some might call it worn out, but James called it comfortable. Besides, it reminded him of where he came from, long before he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Just a quick meeting and then back to the cabin, he reminded himself, putting his trusty cap back on his head. His fishing gear waited in the truck bed, and he'd been looking forward to this weekend getaway for months. The meeting with his hotel management team was the only thing standing between him and 3 days of peaceful solitude by the lake. The valet approached his truck with a hint of confusion, clearly expecting something more impressive from a guest at the Grand Opal. "Just leaving it here for a bit," James said with a friendly smile, handing the young man a $50 bill. "I won't be long." The valet's eyes widened at the generous tip. "Of course, sir. I'll keep it right here for you." James nodded his thanks and headed toward the entrance. He wore faded jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a well-worn leather jacket. Comfortable clothes for the 3-hour drive to his fishing cabin that would follow the meeting. At 62 years old, he had long ago stopped caring about impressing others with designer labels or fancy watches. His net worth hovered somewhere around $4 billion, but most days, he lived like a man with a fraction of that wealth. Despite owning a majority stake in the Grand Opal Hotel chain, James rarely visited any of the locations in person. He trusted his management team to handle day-to-day operations, while he focused on the bigger picture from his modest office downtown. As a result, most of the hotel staff wouldn't recognize him if they passed him on the street. As James walked through the revolving doors into the gleaming lobby, he took a moment to appreciate the space. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from 30-foot ceilings. Plush velvet furniture in deep blues and golds created intimate seating areas throughout the expansive room. Fresh flower arrangements larger than some dining tables filled the air with a subtle fragrance. It was exactly the atmosphere of understated luxury he had envisioned when he purchased the struggling hotel chain 12 years ago and transformed it into a world-class brand. He approached the front desk, where 3 staff members in crisp uniforms assisted guests. The shortest line led to a woman with perfectly styled dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read Victoria Collins, front desk manager. James waited patiently as she finished helping a couple in matching designer outfits check into their room. When it was his turn, he stepped forward with a friendly smile. "Good morning. I'm here for a meeting with Robert Garcia in the executive suite." Victoria looked up, her welcoming smile faltering slightly as she took in James's casual appearance. Her eyes lingered on his baseball cap and her expression shifted to one of barely concealed disapproval. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her tone professionally cool but with an edge of condescension, "but we have a dress code policy at the Grand Opal. Hats are not permitted in the lobby or restaurant areas." She gestured to a small, elegant sign on the counter that listed several dress code requirements. James nodded amicably. "I understand. I'm just here for a quick meeting with Mr. Garcia, then I'll be on my way." Victoria's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Garcia, our general manager, is extremely busy. Do you have an appointment?" Her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Yes, I do. 10:30. He's expecting me," James replied, still smiling despite her increasingly frosty demeanor. Victoria tapped at her computer keyboard, her red nails clicking against the keys. "I don't see any 10:30 appointment in Mr. Garcia's calendar. What did you say your name was again?" "James Bennett." She typed the name, then shook her head. "There's no appointment under that name, sir." James checked his watch. "That's strange. I'm sure it was confirmed yesterday. Would you mind calling up to let him know I'm here?" Victoria's smile tightened. "Sir, Mr. Garcia doesn't take unscheduled meetings, especially not on Friday mornings when we're preparing for weekend check-ins. Perhaps you've confused our hotel with another establishment? The implication was clear in her tone. This wasn't the kind of place for someone dressed like him. I'm quite certain I'm in the right place, James replied, his voice still calm but with less warmth than before. The Grand Opal owned by Bennett Hospitality Group. This is definitely the right hotel. At the mention of the parent company, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Victoria's face, but it quickly disappeared. She straightened her already perfect posture and looked directly at his baseball cap again. Sir, even if you did have a meeting, which our system shows you don't, I still couldn't allow you into the executive offices dressed like that. The Grand Opal maintains certain standards, and I'm afraid your current attire falls short of those requirements. Perhaps you could return another day in more appropriate clothing? A couple waiting in line behind James exchanged whispers, and Victoria's two colleagues at the desk had stopped their work to watch the interaction. James noticed their stares but remained unruffled. He'd faced far worse than a snobbish hotel employee in his journey from factory worker to billionaire. I understand your concern for the hotel's image, James said, but this meeting is rather important. Would it be possible to make an exception just this once? Victoria's smile disappeared completely. I'm afraid not. Our policies are in place for a reason, and we don't make exceptions. Perhaps there's a more suitable establishment down the street that might accommodate your preferred style of dress. She glanced meaningfully toward the door. James took a deep breath. In his younger days, he might have revealed his identity immediately, taking satisfaction in watching her face crumble with the realization. But decades of business had taught him that public confrontations rarely solved anything. I see, he said quietly. Could I at least leave a message for Mr. Garcia? You're welcome to leave your contact information, and if Mr. Garcia is interested, someone from his office might get in touch. Victoria slid a notepad across the counter with two perfectly manicured fingers, as if even this small courtesy was an enormous favor. James had just picked up the pen when a voice called out from across the lobby. Mr. Bennett. I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. Robert Garcia, the hotel's general manager, hurried toward the front desk. In his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a tailored gray suit, Robert had worked for James for nearly a decade. Unlike most of the staff, he attended the annual executive retreat and would recognize the owner anywhere. Victoria's expression changed instantly, confusion replacing her previous disdain. Mr. Garcia, I was just explaining to this gentleman that we couldn't find his appointment in the system. Robert reached them, slightly out of breath. That's because it wasn't in the system, Victoria. Mr. Bennett prefers to keep his visits low profile. He turned to James with a respectful nod. It's good to see you, sir. I have everything ready for our meeting upstairs. Victoria's face drained of color as the pieces fell into place. Her eyes darted from Robert to James and back again. Mr. Bennett. As in, James Bennett, owner of Bennett Hospitality Group and majority shareholder of the Grand Opal Hotel chain, Robert confirmed, watching as Victoria's professional composure crumbled. The man who signs all our paychecks. The lobby seemed to go silent around them. The other front desk staff stared openly now, and even the guests waiting in line appeared to realize something significant was happening. Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Mr. Bennett, I had no idea. I'm so terribly sorry for the misunderstanding. Of course you're welcome in the hotel. The dress code is merely a suggestion for, that is, we didn't realize. James held up a hand to pause her stammering apology. His face revealed nothing of his thoughts, but those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. Robert, is the conference room ready? I'd like to get this meeting started. Yes, sir. Everything's prepared, Robert answered, glancing nervously between his boss and the front desk manager. Good. James turned back to Victoria, whose face had now flushed a deep red. Ms. Collins, isn't it? I'd appreciate if you could join us for this meeting as well. Victoria swallowed hard. Of course, Mr. Bennett. Let me just get someone to cover the desk. As Victoria whispered urgent instructions to a colleague, Robert leaned closer to James. Sir, I want to apologize for this reception. I should have communicated your arrival better to the staff. James shook his head slightly. No need to apologize, Robert. In fact, I think this has been quite illuminating. He adjusted his baseball cap, settling it more firmly on his head. Sometimes it's good to see how things really work when people don't think the owner is watching. Together, the three of them walked toward the executive elevator, Victoria trailing slightly behind. The woman who had been so confident in her authority minutes ago now looked as though she was walking to her own execution. James, however, showed no anger. He merely observed the hotel around him with increased interest, noting details he might have missed if he'd been welcomed as the billionaire owner rather than dismissed as an underdressed nobody. He had much to think about before the meeting began, and Victoria, Collins had no idea that her worst mistake might ultimately lead to her greatest opportunity for growth. The executive elevator climbed silently to the top floor of the Grand Opal. Inside, Robert Garcia stood with his hands clasped in front of him, occasionally glancing at James Bennett, who appeared completely at ease despite the tension filling the small space. Victoria Collins, meanwhile, stared fixedly at the illuminated floor numbers, her back pressed against the elevator wall as if trying to make herself invisible. When the doors slid open to reveal a corridor lined with abstract artwork and soft lighting, Robert stepped out first. "This way, Mr. Bennett. I've prepared the main conference room for our meeting." James nodded and followed, adjusting his baseball cap slightly. Victoria trailed behind them, her normally confident stride reduced to hesitant steps. The clicking of her heels against the marble floor echoed down the hallway, marking each step toward what she assumed would be the end of her career. The conference room was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. A massive oak table dominated the center of the room, and leather chairs surrounded it. A coffee service had been arranged at one end along with a selection of pastries from the hotel's award-winning bakery. "Please have a seat," James said, gesturing to the chairs. He removed his worn leather jacket but kept his baseball cap firmly in place, a small detail that wasn't lost on Victoria as she perched on the edge of a chair, looking like she might bolt at any moment. Robert cleared his throat. "Mr. Bennett, I've prepared the quarterly reports as you requested. We've seen a 15% increase in occupancy rates compared to last year, and guest satisfaction scores are at an all-time high." He slid a leather portfolio across the table. James didn't reach for it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Before we get to that, I'd like to discuss something else." He turned to Victoria, whose complexion had gone from deathly pale to flushed red in a matter of seconds. "Ms. Collins, how long have you worked for the Grand Opal?" She sat up straighter, hands clasped tightly in her lap. 5 years next month, Mr. Bennett, and you're the front desk manager now." "When did that promotion happen?" "About 8 months ago, sir." James nodded slowly. "That's quite a responsibility. The front desk staff are the face of our hotel, aren't they? The first impression guests receive when they walk through those doors." Victoria swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Tell me, Ms. Collins, is it standard practice at the Grand Opal to judge guests by their clothing? To suggest they might be more comfortable at establishments down the street if they don't meet your personal standards?" His tone remained calm, almost conversational, which somehow made the questions even more devastating. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Victoria's eyes dropped to the table. "No, sir," she said quietly. "It's not our policy." "And yet," James continued, "that's exactly what happened downstairs, isn't it?" The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Victoria lifted her gaze to meet James's. To her credit, she didn't try to minimize what had happened. "Yes, sir. I was completely out of line. I made assumptions based on your appearance, and I treated you with disrespect. There's no excuse for my behavior." Her voice trembled slightly but remained clear. James studied her for a long moment. Most employees in her position would be pleading for their jobs by now, promising it would never happen again or worse, trying to justify their actions. Victoria had done none of that. "I appreciate your honesty," he finally said. "Now, I'm curious, is the hat policy real or did you make that up on the spot?" Victoria's cheeks flushed deeper. It's technically in our guest code of conduct, but..." She hesitated before continuing. "But it's selectively enforced. We don't usually mention it to certain types of guests." "And what types would those be?" "Those who appear wealthy or influential," she admitted, the words clearly painful to say aloud. James removed his baseball cap and placed it on the table between them. It looked startlingly out of place on the polished mahogany surface. "This cap has been with me for 15 years. I bought it on my first real fishing trip after I made my first $1 million. Before that, I spent 30 years working my way up from nothing, Factory floors, night shifts, sleeping in my car when times were tough. He ran a hand through his hair. I've been rich for a while now, Ms. Collins, but I spend a lot more of my life being exactly the kind of person you wouldn't want in your hotel lobby. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. The official company biography of James Bennett mentioned his rise from humble beginnings, but hearing it directly from him made it real in a way the corporate storytelling never had. Mr. Bennett, Robert interjected, I want to assure you that this incident doesn't reflect our company values. We can begin termination proceedings immediately and James held up a hand, stopping Robert mid-sentence. I didn't build this company by throwing people away at their first mistake, Robert. He turned back to Victoria. I'm not going to fire you today, Ms. Collins. The relief that flooded her face was quickly replaced by confusion. You're not? No. What happened downstairs wasn't just about you. It was about a culture that's developed in this hotel, maybe in this whole chain where appearances matter more than people. And culture starts at the top. He glanced meaningfully at Robert before continuing. That's something I need to address as the owner. James stood and walked to the windows looking out at the city below. When I bought this hotel chain, it was failing. The previous owners had been so focused on luxury and exclusivity that they'd forgotten the fundamental truth of hospitality. It's about how you make people feel. He turned back to face them. Every single person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Whether they're wearing a designer suit or ripped jeans, whether they're booking the penthouse or just using the bathroom, whether they're a celebrity or a street cleaner, the moment we start sorting people into worthy and unworthy based on what we see on the outside, we've failed at our most basic job. Victoria nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving James's face. For the first time since entering the elevator, she looked less afraid and more thoughtful. James returned to the table and sat down. So here's what's going to happen. Ms. Collins, for the next 2 weeks, you won't be working at the front desk, she tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Instead, you'll be rotating through different departments in the hotel. 2 days with housekeeping, 2 days in maintenance, 2 days in the kitchen, 2 days with the doormen and valets, and so on. You'll work the same shifts as the regular staff doing the same jobs they do. Victoria blinked in surprise. You want me to clean rooms and fix toilets? I want you to understand every single person who makes this hotel function, James corrected her. I want you to hear their stories and learn about their lives. I want you to see what it's like to work hard all day and still be invisible to the guests you serve. He leaned forward slightly. And yes, I want you to clean rooms and fix toilets if that's what the job requires that day. Robert looked concerned. Mr. Bennett, with all due respect, we're short-staffed at the front desk already. Taking Ms. Collins away for 2 weeks will create significant scheduling issues. Then hire temporary help, James replied firmly. This is more important than a staffing inconvenience. Victoria sat straighter in her chair. I understand, Mr. Bennett. When would you like me to start? Tomorrow morning. Report to housekeeping at 6 a.m. James picked up his baseball cap and turned it in his hands. Oh, and one more thing. I'll be staying at the hotel for the next 2 weeks. Both Robert and Victoria looked surprised at this announcement. But sir, Robert began, your cabin trip. The fish will still be there in 2 weeks, James said with a small smile. I think it's time I got to know my own hotel better. I'll be checking in as a regular guest. No special treatment, no executive suite, just a standard room like anyone else would book. He put his cap back on, and I'll be dressed like this most of the time. I'm curious to see how the staff treats me when they don't know who I am. Robert looked like he might protest further but thought better of it. Victoria, on the other hand, seemed to be processing everything with a new awareness in her eyes. Ms. Collins, you can return to the front desk for the remainder of today. Mr. Garcia will inform your department about the temporary reassignment. James stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Robert, now we can go through those reports you prepared. Victoria rose from her chair, understanding she was dismissed. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. She paused, searching for the right words. I won't waste this opportunity. As she walked toward the door, James called after her. Ms. Collins? She turned back. Yes, sir? James gestured to his baseball cap. Sometimes the most valuable people aren't the ones in the fanciest packages. Remember that. Victoria nodded, a new determination settling across her features. As the door closed behind her, She already knew this wasn't just about saving her job anymore. Something more important was at stake. Something about who she was and who she wanted to be. Back in the elevator, descending to the lobby, Victoria caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. For the first time that day, she really looked at herself. Not just her perfect hair or carefully applied makeup, but the person underneath. The person who had been so quick to judge, so certain of her own importance. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., that person would begin to change. She was sure of it. The alarm blared at 4:45 a.m., jolting Victoria from a restless sleep. She reached for her phone, momentarily confused by the early hour until reality came flooding back. Today marked the first day of her 2-week reassignment, starting with housekeeping at 6 a.m. Victoria had never arrived at the hotel before sunrise. The drive was eerily quiet, the streets nearly empty except for delivery trucks and early morning joggers. She parked in the employee lot behind the hotel, rather than using the valet service as she normally did. The contrast wasn't lost on her as she walked past the loading docks and entered through the staff entrance, swiping her ID card at a door she'd rarely used before. The employee break room was nothing like the elegant spaces reserved for guests. Fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, illuminating beige walls decorated with safety posters and work schedules. A group of housekeepers sat around a table, most nursing coffee cups and looking half awake. Conversations in at least 3 different languages stopped when Victoria entered, her pressed slacks and button-up shirt standing out among their gray uniform scrubs. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair stepped forward. "You must be Victoria. I'm Lucia, head of housekeeping." Her accent was soft but clear, her handshake firm. "Mr. Garcia told me you would be joining us for 2 days." Victoria nodded, acutely aware of the curious stares from around the room. "Yes, thank you for having me." Lucia gestured to a small locker. "You can put your things in there. I have a uniform for you." She handed Victoria a stack of gray scrubs similar to what the others were wearing. "Bathroom is through that door if you want to change." The scrubs were slightly too big and made from a rough cotton blend that felt nothing like the tailored clothes Victoria usually wore. The plain black sneakers Lucia provided were practical but boxy. Looking in the bathroom mirror, Victoria hardly recognized herself without her usual perfect makeup and styled hair. When she emerged, Lucia handed her a clipboard. "You'll be working with May today. She's one of our best. Pay attention and learn." She called out across the room in a language Victoria didn't understand, and a petite woman in her 60s nodded and approached. "May doesn't speak much English," Lucia explained, "but she knows this hotel better than anyone. She's been cleaning rooms here for 26 years. 26 years. Victoria tried to process that number. This woman had been cleaning hotel rooms since before Victoria had even graduated high school. May smiled politely but said nothing, as Lucia gave quick instructions in her language. Then she motioned for Victoria to follow her toward a service elevator Victoria hadn't even known existed. They rode up to the 12th floor in silence. May pulled a large housekeeping cart from a service closet and began checking her supplies. Tiny bottles of shampoo, stacks of towels, cleaning sprays, vacuum attachments. Her movements were quick and efficient, a routine she had clearly performed thousands of times. "We start," May said, one of the few English phrases she seemed comfortable with. She knocked on the first door, called out "housekeeping," and waited a few seconds before using her key card. The suite was a disaster. Clothes strewn everywhere, room service trays with half-eaten food, wet towels on the bathroom floor, and the distinct smell of stale alcohol hanging in the air. Victoria couldn't help but grimace. May simply got to work. She stripped the beds with practiced movements, bundling the sheets with swift efficiency. She pointed to the bathroom and handed Victoria gloves and cleaning spray. The message was clear. Start scrubbing. For the next hour, Victoria cleaned toilets, wiped down shower walls, and mopped floors, while May handled the rest of the suite. By the time they finished the first room, Victoria's back ached, and her hands felt raw despite the gloves. "Next room," May said, already moving her cart down the hallway. They had 19 more rooms to clean before their shift ended. By midday, Victoria had cleaned 8 bathrooms, changed countless sheets, and vacuumed more square footage than she cared to count. Her perfect manicure was ruined, her hair had fallen flat against her forehead, and sweat had soaked through her scrubs. Yet May, who had to be at least 20 years older than Victoria, kept working with the same steady pace she'd started with, rarely pausing for a break. During their brief lunch period in the staff room, Victoria collapsed into a chair, muscles screaming in protest. She unwrapped the sandwich she'd brought from home, suddenly ravenous. A young housekeeper sat down across from her, looking at Victoria with curious eyes. "So you're the front desk manager who got in trouble?" she asked in accented but fluent English. Victoria nearly choked on her sandwich. "Word travels fast around here, doesn't it?" The young woman shrugged. "Hotel is like small village. Everyone knows everyone's business." She took a bite of her own lunch, leftovers in a plastic container. "I'm Nadia, by the way." "Nice to meet you," Victoria said automatically, then paused. "Wait, have we met before?" "You look familiar." Nadia smiled slightly. "I've worked here for 2 years. I clean the executive floor 3 times a week. I've emptied your trash can many times." The realization hit Victoria hard. She had probably seen Nadia dozens of times but had never truly noticed her. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you." "Most people don't see us," Nadia said matter-of-factly without a trace of bitterness. "We are like ghosts. We come in, make everything perfect and leave without being noticed. That's our job." The afternoon continued much like the morning, though Victoria was now moving slower, her energy depleted. As they cleaned the 15th room of the day, she noticed May pausing to look out the window at the city below. "Beautiful view," May said, pointing to the skyline. Victoria nodded, surprised by the comment. It was the first non-work-related thing May had said all day. "Yes, it is." May smiled and returned to changing pillowcases with quick, practiced movements. 26 years, same view. Always beautiful." Something about the simple statement stuck with Victoria throughout the afternoon. 26 years of cleaning up after strangers, making beds that would be unmade again, scrubbing toilets that would be used again, all while appreciating the same view that many guests probably never even noticed. By the time their shift ended at 2:30 p.m., Victoria was physically exhausted in a way she'd never experienced. Her feet throbbed, her lower back ached, and her hands were red and chapped despite the gloves. As she changed back into her own clothes, wincing with every movement, she realized that May and the others would be back tomorrow to do it all again. Victoria was heading toward the employee exit when she spotted a familiar baseball cap in the hotel lobby. James Bennett sat in one of the plush chairs, reading a newspaper as if he were any ordinary hotel guest. He wore the same casual clothes as the day before, jeans, t-shirt, and that worn blue cap. Curious, Victoria paused near a decorative column where she could observe without being noticed. A young front desk clerk approached James with a clearly forced smile. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but we do have a policy about hats in the lobby area." James looked up from his paper. "Oh, is that so?" The clerk nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. I'd appreciate if you could remove it while in the public areas of the hotel." "I see," James said, removing his cap. "Is this a policy that applies to everyone?" The clerk shifted his weight. "Well, yes, officially." "Officially?" James raised an eyebrow. "But not in practice?" Before the clerk could answer, a well-dressed businessman walked through the lobby wearing an expensive-looking fedora. No one approached him or mentioned any hat policy. James put his cap back on. "Interesting. It seems some hats are more acceptable than others." The clerk's face flushed. "Sir, it's all right," James said kindly. "I understand you're just doing what you've been taught. Thank you for the information." He went back to his newspaper, effectively ending the conversation. The clerk retreated, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. Victoria watched the entire exchange with a growing sense of discomfort. 24 hours ago, she would have done exactly what that clerk had done, enforced a rule selectively based on appearances and perceived status. She was about to leave when James glanced up and noticed her. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement but said nothing. Victoria nodded back, then pushed through the door into the fading afternoon light. On the drive home, she couldn't stop thinking about May saying 26 years, same view. Always beautiful. About Nadia saying, "Most people don't see us." About the young clerk enforcing a rule for one person while ignoring the same violation from someone who looked wealthy. Victoria had always prided herself on running a tight ship at the front desk, on maintaining the hotel's standards of excellence. But now, for the first time, She wondered if some of those standards had nothing to do with excellence and everything to do with exclusion. As she soaked in a hot bath that evening, trying to ease her aching muscles, Victoria realized that tomorrow she would do it all again, but this time in the maintenance department. She closed her eyes, wondering what other revelations awaited her in the coming days, and whether she would even recognize herself by the end of these 2 weeks. The woman who had dismissed James Bennett from the hotel lobby suddenly seemed like a stranger to her. Someone she used to be, but no longer quite recognized. The final day of Victoria's 2-week reassignment arrived faster than she expected. After rotating through nearly every department in the hotel, from housekeeping to maintenance, from the kitchen to the concierge desk, she found herself on her last assignment, working alongside Miguel, the head of the hotel's gardening and grounds team. "These roses need special attention," Miguel explained as they knelt in the hotel's courtyard garden. His weathered hands carefully pruned the delicate flowers with a precision that spoke of years of practice. "Too much water, they drown. Too little, they wither. Just right, and they reward you with beauty." Victoria watched as he demonstrated the proper technique, then tried to mimic his movements on the next bush. Her cuts were less confident, her hands still unfamiliar with the gardening shears. "Don't be afraid," Miguel encouraged. "Plants are forgiving if your intention is good." They worked through the morning under a warm sun, weeding flower beds, trimming hedges, and refreshing mulch around decorative trees. The work was physically demanding but peaceful in a way Victoria hadn't experienced in her other rotations. There was something meditative about nurturing living things, about transforming tangled growth into ordered beauty. "You know," Miguel said during their water break, "I watch the guests from out here. They walk past these gardens every day, but maybe 1 in 20 actually stops to notice the flowers." He gestured to the courtyard they'd spent hours perfecting. "But even if they don't notice, the beauty still affects them. Makes the hotel feel more special, more cared for." Victoria nodded, understanding what he meant. "It's like the clean rooms and working elevators. People only notice when something's wrong, not when everything's right." "Exactly." Miguel smiled, the skin around his eyes crinkling. "We do our work not for the recognition, but because it matters. Quality shows itself whether people can name it or not." As they returned to their work, Victoria reflected on Miguel's words. For years she had focused on the visible aspects of the hotel experience, the check-in process, the guest complaints, the VIP treatments. But over these 2 weeks she'd learned that the heart of hospitality lived in the unseen details, the perfectly tucked sheets, the properly functioning shower, the flourishing garden that guests walked past without a second glance. Around midday, Robert Garcia, the general manager, approached them in the garden. He looked slightly uncomfortable in the heat, his suit jacket draped over his arm. "Victoria, could I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, nodding politely to Miguel. Victoria set down her garden tools and wiped her hands on her work pants. "Of course." They walked to a shaded bench near the hotel entrance. Victoria was acutely aware of the dirt under her fingernails and the sweat dampening her t-shirt, a stark contrast to Robert's crisp appearance. "Your 2 weeks are officially up tomorrow," Robert began. "Mr. Bennett has called a staff meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. He's requested that all department heads attend, and he specifically asked for you to prepare a presentation." Victoria blinked in surprise. "A presentation? About what?" "About your experience these past 2 weeks and any recommendations you might have for improving hotel operations." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "He's invited the entire executive team from corporate headquarters as well." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. A presentation to the executive team, after 2 weeks of cleaning toilets, fixing pipes, and pruning roses? "I see," she managed to say. "Thank you for letting me know." Robert stood to leave, then hesitated. "Victoria, I've been watching you these past 2 weeks. The way you've approached each assignment, how you've connected with the staff, it's been impressive. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that." After he left, Victoria returned to the garden, her mind racing. What could she possibly say in this presentation? What had she really learned that would matter to executives who probably cared most about profit margins and occupancy rates? "Everything okay?" Miguel asked when she rejoined him. "I have to give a presentation tomorrow to the corporate executives," she admitted, "about what I've learned and how to improve the hotel." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "And what have you learned?" Victoria looked around at the garden they'd spent the day tending, then back toward the hotel where she'd worked in nearly every department. "More than I ever expected to," she answered honestly. That evening, Victoria sat at her kitchen table surrounded by notes. She'd tried to capture something meaningful from each department: the efficiency of the housekeeping team despite their limited resources, the knowledge of the maintenance staff who could fix almost anything with the right tools, the patience of the restaurant servers who balanced hospitality with speed. But the common thread that ran through all her experiences wasn't about operations or efficiency, or even customer service techniques. It was about people, how they were seen, how they were valued, how they were treated. Victoria worked late into the night, organizing her thoughts and preparing her presentation. By the time she finally went to bed, she felt a surprising sense of clarity about what she needed to say. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the hotel wearing her regular work clothes, a tailored pantsuit and heels, but they felt strange after 2 weeks in uniforms and work clothes. She made her way to the hotel's largest conference room, where staff had already begun to gather. The room was divided in a way that reflected the hotel's hierarchy. At the front sat James Bennett alongside 5 other executives from corporate headquarters, all in business attire. Behind them were the department heads: Robert Garcia, Lucia from housekeeping, Frank from maintenance, and the others Victoria had worked with. At the back stood representatives from each department, including some of the people Victoria had worked alongside: May, Carlos, Miguel, and dozens of others whose names and faces she now knew. As she entered, conversations quieted. Victoria felt every eye in the room on her as she walked to the front where Robert had indicated she should sit. James Bennett caught her eye and gave her a small nod, his expression revealing nothing. At exactly 9 a.m., James stood to address the room. "Thank you all for being here. 2 weeks ago, I witnessed an incident in our lobby that concerned me deeply. Rather than simply addressing that single incident, I wanted to understand if it represented a deeper issue within our organization. That's why I asked Ms. Collins to spend time working in various departments throughout the hotel." He turned to Victoria. "I'd now like to hear what you've learned, Ms. Collins, and what changes you would recommend." Victoria took a deep breath and walked to the podium. The notes she'd prepared suddenly seemed inadequate as she looked out at the faces watching her, from the executives who controlled the company's future to the housekeepers who made the hotel function day after day. "2 weeks ago," she began, "I made a terrible mistake. I judged someone based solely on their appearance and treated them with disrespect as a result. That person turned out to be Mr. Bennett, but the real problem wasn't who he was. It was how I behaved and what that behavior represented." Victoria paused, gathering her thoughts. "What I've learned over these past 2 weeks can't be captured in a simple operational review or efficiency study. What I've learned is about people, the people who make this hotel work, and the people who stay here." She described her experiences in each department, highlighting not just the work, but the individuals who had taught her, guided her, and shown her aspects of the hotel she'd never considered before. "Our housekeepers clean 20 rooms a day, bending and lifting and scrubbing for hours, yet they still notice and appreciate the view from every window. Our maintenance team can fix anything from a leaky faucet to a complex electrical system, often using creativity and experience when parts aren't available. Our kitchen staff prepares hundreds of meals daily in sweltering heat, each plate crafted with care regardless of who ordered it." Victoria looked directly at the executive team. "We talk about luxury and 5-star service, but the true luxury of the Grand Opal isn't in the marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It's in the people who pour their energy, expertise, and care into this building every single day," she continued, her voice growing more confident. "My recommendation isn't about changing operations or procedures. It's about changing our culture. We need to value every employee regardless of their position or salary. We need to treat every guest with respect regardless of what they're wearing or how much they're spending." Victoria turned to look at May, who sat quietly in the back row. "And we need to remember that a person who's worked here for 26 years, cleaning rooms day after day, has just as much to offer this company as anyone sitting in the executive row." For the next 15 minutes, Victoria outlined specific suggestions: regular rotation programs so managers could experience other departments, a revised dress code policy that focused on cleanliness rather than style, recognition programs that highlighted contributions from all levels of staff, and training that emphasized treating everyone with equal respect. When she finished, the room was silent. Victoria looked at James Bennett, trying to read his expression. Had she gone too far? Had she misunderstood what he wanted from this presentation? Then from the back of the room, someone began to applaud. Victoria looked up to see Frank, the maintenance supervisor, on his feet, clapping with a broad smile on his face. Next to him, Lucia joined in, then Miguel, then others throughout the room until nearly everyone was standing and applauding. James Bennett remained seated, but the slight smile on his face told Victoria everything she needed to know. When the applause finally died down, he stood and approached the podium. "Thank you, Ms. Collins," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's exactly the kind of thinking this company needs." He turned to address the room. "Starting today, we're implementing a new position at each of our hotels, Director of Guest and Staff Experience. This person will be responsible for ensuring that our commitment to respect and dignity extends to everyone who walks through our doors, whether they're checking in as a guest or clocking in as an employee." He turned back to Victoria. "Ms. Collins, I'd like to offer you this position here at the Grand Opal. Based on what I've seen these past 2 weeks, I can't think of anyone better suited for the role." Victoria felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Surprise, gratitude, and a deep sense of responsibility. "I'd be honored, Mr. Bennett." As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, many of the staff members Victoria had worked with came to congratulate her. May gave her a shy hug. Frank patted her on the back with his weathered hand. Carlos offered a high five. James Bennett was the last to approach her. He was wearing his baseball cap again, looking as casual as he had that first day in the lobby. "You know," he said with a small smile, "sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest opportunities for growth. You turned yours into something remarkable." Victoria nodded, thinking about how much had changed in just 2 weeks. "Thank you for giving me the chance to learn, instead of just firing me on the spot." "Second chances are important," James replied, "but it's what you do with them that matters." He adjusted his cap slightly. "And remember, Ms. Collins, it's never about the hat. It's always about the person wearing it." As he walked away, Victoria looked around the conference room where hotel staff from every department were mingling, the usual barriers of position and status temporarily forgotten. She had a lot of work ahead of her in this new role, but for the first time in her career, she felt she was exactly where she needed to be. The woman who had once judged people by their appearances now had the opportunity to build a culture where everyone was valued for who they were, not what they wore or how much money they had. It wouldn't be easy, but as Victoria had learned over these 2 extraordinary weeks, the most important things rarely were. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Grand Opal's main conference room as hotel staff from every department filed in. Housekeepers still in their gray uniforms sat beside kitchen staff in white coats. Maintenance workers in their navy coveralls found seats near doormen in their maroon uniforms. The usual divisions between front of house and back of house seemed to dissolve as people greeted one another, some exchanging curious glances about why they had all been gathered. Victoria stood near the entrance, watching as the room filled, in her standard front desk attire, a tailored black suit and crisp white blouse. She felt strangely out of place after 2 weeks in various department uniforms. Her hands, still showing signs of the physical work she'd done, fidgeted with the folder containing her notes. Nervous, Victoria turned to find James Bennett beside her, wearing slacks and a button-up shirt, more formal than his usual attire, though still without a tie. His baseball cap was conspicuously absent. "A little," she admitted. "I've never presented to the entire staff before." James nodded thoughtfully. "Just tell them what you've learned. The truth has a way of resonating with people." Before Victoria could respond, Robert Garcia approached them. "We're ready to begin, Mr. Bennett. Everyone is here." James gestured toward the front of the room. "After you." Victoria made her way to the podium as conversations quieted. Looking out at the sea of faces, many she now knew by name after working alongside them, she took a deep breath. "Good morning," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "For those who don't know me, I'm Victoria Collins, the front desk manager, or at least that was my only job until 2 weeks ago." A few knowing smiles appeared in the audience. The story of her encounter with James Bennett had become hotel legend by now. Most of you know that Mr. Bennett assigned me to work in various departments after an incident in the lobby. Victoria paused, meeting James's eyes briefly before continuing. What you might not know is why. It wasn't just punishment for disrespecting a guest. It was an opportunity to see this hotel, really see it, from perspectives I'd never considered before. Victoria set aside her prepared notes. The word she needed wouldn't be found in bullet points or memorized statistics. In housekeeping, I learned that cleaning 20 rooms a day is harder than running any front desk shift I've ever worked. I learned that May has been making beds and scrubbing bathrooms for 26 years with a consistency and care I can only hope to match someday. She turned slightly to address a different section of the room. In maintenance, Frank taught me that there's an art to fixing things, whether it's a leaky faucet or a broken elevator. He showed me that sometimes the most valuable employees are the ones guests never see, the ones who make sure everything works so well that no one notices the effort behind it. Victoria continued through each department, highlighting specific people and lessons from her 2-week journey. She spoke about Carlos in the restaurant, who treated every guest like a VIP regardless of how much they spent, about Miguel in groundskeeping, who created beauty that most people walked past without noticing, about the doormen who stood for hours in all weather, maintaining their smiles and enthusiasm for each new arrival. What I've realized, Victoria said, her voice growing more confident, is that the Grand Opal isn't defined by its marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It's defined by its people, all of its people. And for too long we've operated as if some people matter more than others, both among our staff and among our guests. She pulled out a piece of paper from her folder. This is our dress code policy. It states that hats are not permitted in the lobby or restaurant areas, but as many of you know, this rule isn't applied equally. A construction worker in a baseball cap gets approached immediately, while a businessman in an expensive fedora walks through unbothered. Victoria set the paper down. This selective enforcement is just one small example of a larger problem. We've created an environment where appearances matter more than character, where wealth signals worth, and where those who serve are somehow less important than those being served. The room had gone completely still. Even the usual shuffling and whispers had ceased as staff members listened intently. I've spent the past 2 weeks working alongside many of you, Victoria continued. I've seen your dedication, your expertise, and your pride in what you do. And I've realized something important. There is no job in this hotel that is less valuable than any other. Each role is essential. Each person is worthy of the same respect we offer our wealthiest guests. Victoria took a moment to look around the room, making eye contact with individuals she'd worked with. Lucia from housekeeping, Frank from maintenance, Carlos from the restaurant. So I've developed some recommendations for changes we need to make at the Grand Opal. With Mr. Bennett's permission, I'd like to share them with all of you. James nodded from his seat in the front row, a slight smile on his face. Victoria picked up her folder again. First, our policies should be applied equally to all guests, regardless of their appearance or perceived wealth. That means either everyone can wear hats in the lobby, or no one can. No exceptions. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Second, we need to create more opportunities for staff to understand different roles within the hotel. I propose a shadow program, where managers spend at least 1 day per quarter working in departments other than their own. She continued through her list of recommendations. A revised recognition program that highlighted contributions from all departments, an improved staff break room, a suggestion system that gave equal weight to ideas from every level of employment, and a commitment to promoting from within whenever possible. Finally, Victoria said, I believe we need to fundamentally change how we think about luxury hospitality. True luxury isn't about exclusivity or keeping certain people out. It's about making everyone feel valued, respected, and welcomed, both our guests and our staff. She closed her folder and looked directly at James Bennett. Mr. Bennett, I want to thank you for the lesson you taught me. When you walked into our lobby 2 weeks ago, I saw only a baseball cap and casual clothes. I failed to see the person wearing them. That mistake has led to the most important learning experience of my career. Victoria turned back to address the entire room. I believe we can make the Grand Opal a place where everyone feels valued, not just those who look the part. And I'm committed to being part of that change, whether in my role as front desk manager or in any other capacity. As Victoria stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in applause. Many of the staff members she'd worked alongside over the past 2 weeks were on their feet, their faces reflecting appreciation and respect that hadn't been there before. James Bennett approached the podium as the applause continued. He waited for the room to quiet before speaking. "Thank you, Victoria, for that thoughtful presentation. I couldn't agree more with your assessment and recommendations." He turned to address the entire staff. "The Grand Opal has always prided itself on luxury and excellence. But somewhere along the way, we confused luxury with exclusivity, and excellence with appearance." James pulled his familiar baseball cap from his pocket and placed it on his head, drawing smiles from throughout the room. "Starting today, we're implementing every one of Ms. Collins' recommendations, and we're creating a new position, Director of Guest and Staff Experience. This person will report directly to me and will be responsible for ensuring that our commitment to respect and dignity extends to everyone who walks through our doors, whether they're checking in as a guest or clocking in for work." He turned to Victoria. "Ms. Collins, I'd like to offer you this position. I believe you're uniquely qualified for it now." Victoria felt a wave of emotion she hadn't expected, pride mixed with humility, excitement tempered by the weight of responsibility. "I would be honored, Mr. Bennett." As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, many stopped to congratulate Victoria. May gave her a shy smile and a gentle pat on the arm. Frank shook her hand firmly, his weathered face creased in a rare grin. Carlos offered a high five and promised her a free dessert the next time she dined in the restaurant. The last to approach was Robert Garcia, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Congratulations on the new position, Victoria. Your ideas are ambitious," Victoria smiled. "Change usually is, Robert. But I hope you'll work with me on implementing them." He nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his expression. "Of course, it's just, some of these changes will take time." "We have time," she replied. "This isn't about overnight transformation. It's about starting a journey toward becoming the kind of hotel we can all be proud of, one that values everyone equally." As the conference room emptied, Victoria found herself alone with James Bennett, who was studying the room with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, adjusting his baseball cap, "I didn't plan all this when I walked into the lobby 2 weeks ago. I was just a guy hoping to get to a meeting without being hassled about my hat." Victoria smiled. "Life's funny that way. Sometimes our worst moments lead to our best opportunities." "That's true." James turned to face her directly. "The question is whether we recognize those opportunities when they come." "I almost didn't," Victoria admitted. "I could have just apologized and gone back to business as usual." James nodded. "But you didn't. You embraced the chance to learn and grow. That's rare, Victoria. Most people spend their lives avoiding the uncomfortable truths that might change them." They walked together toward the lobby where the hotel day was in full swing. Guests checked in at the front desk, bellhops carried luggage, and the usual hum of activity filled the space. But Victoria saw it all differently now, not as transactions or procedures, but as people connecting with other people. Near the entrance, an older man in worn jeans and a baseball cap similar to James's was being greeted warmly by a front desk clerk who, just 2 weeks earlier, might have given him a cold reception or mentioned the hat policy. The small change brought a smile to Victoria's face. "It's already starting," she said quietly. James followed her gaze and nodded. "Small steps. That's how real change happens." As they reached the main doors, James extended his hand. "Good luck in your new role, Miss Collins. I have a feeling the Grand Opal is about to become truly grand in all the ways that matter." Victoria shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the second chance, Mr. Bennett. Not everyone gets one." "True," he agreed, his eyes crinkling with a smile. "But remember, it's what we do with that chance that counts." As James walked away toward the parking area, Victoria turned to look back at the hotel lobby, the same space where her journey had begun 2 weeks ago. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers were unchanged, but her perspective had been completely transformed. She straightened her shoulders and headed toward what would become her new office, already making mental notes about where to begin. The Grand Opal would become a place where everyone felt valued, where appearance took a back seat to character, and where a person in a baseball cap would receive the same respect as anyone else, whether they owned the hotel or not.